In this very in-depth forecast, the Central Plains are currently being monitored for significant severe weather, as a possible derecho is expected to bring violent wind gusts upwards of 100 miles per hour, massive widespread hail greater than 2 inches, and a couple of embedded tornadoes are possible. Everything you need to know on Project Gladiator. Hello everyone, welcome back to another Project Gladiator weather forecast. Today I'll be covering the weather for May 19th of 2024. This will be an extremely in-depth weather forecast like the other in-depth weather forecasts that are on this channel. So if you're not into that type of content, I suggest either watching for the information or clicking away if the information makes you a little bit too overwhelmed. This is going to be a little bit more for advanced viewers like every other in-depth weather forecast I've done on this channel. But taking a look at our risks for today, we do have a moderate risk for the Central Plains for central Kansas there, with a enhanced risk that extends down into northern Oklahoma and northwestern Oklahoma, with a slight risk that extends up across the vast majority of the Central Plains all the way up to the north in central South Dakota and southern North Dakota there. And we also do have another slight risk for eastern coastal regions of the Florida Peninsula, including the downtown metro regions of Fort Lauderdale, Miami. Risks for today do include a 5% tornado risk for the Central Plains, as well as a small 2% tornado risk for coastal regions of Florida. We also have a 45% damaging wind risk for the Central Plains and a 5% damaging wind risk for the eastern coast of Florida. This is going to be the primary driving risk and the primary concern for severe thunderstorms that are going to develop across the Central Plains for today. We also do have a 45% hail risk, which is equivalent of moderate risk on top of that 45% damaging wind risk. Either or could issue a moderate risk by themselves, but hail is going to be another big one because it's also up to par with a moderate risk as well. And we are definitely expected to see very widespread and very large hail across this region as well. That's going to be another big concern on top of our damaging wind risk. And our tornado risk is going to be a little bit more of a secondary thing, but still something big to watch out for. We also do have a 15% damaging wind risk for the coastal regions of Florida there, where we could see some scattered damaging wind gusts. For tomorrow, we do have a slight risk for the Central Plains into portions of the Midwest, for Nebraska, northern Kansas, northwestern Missouri, and southwestern Iowa. Risks for tomorrow do include a broad 2% tornado risk that extends up across the rest of the marginal risk for severe thunderstorms, including Michigan, Wisconsin, Illinois, northern Indiana, Iowa, Missouri, Kansas, Nebraska, and northeastern Colorado, with a 15% damaging wind risk and a 15% hail risk, where we could see some scattered damaging wind gusts and the possibility for some scattered large hail. For our day 3 outlook, we do have a pretty large enhanced risk for eastern Kansas into Iowa, southern Minnesota, Wisconsin, Illinois, and the northern half of Missouri, where we are expected to see some upcoming significant severe thunderstorms, or we are monitoring for significant severe thunderstorms upcoming. A lot of models definitely have some pretty concerning things. This does have a probabilistic 30%. It isn't hatched though, so we don't have a combined risk for significant severe thunderstorms, but I do think significant severe thunderstorms are definitely possible upcoming. Then for day 4, day 8 outlook, we do have a day 4 15% that extends all the way from Texas into Ohio and the Detroit region, where we could be watching for some widespread significant severe thunderstorms. And then we also have a day 5 15% for Oklahoma, northern Texas, northeastern Texas, Arkansas, and northern Louisiana, where we could also see some upcoming significant severe thunderstorms. Then for day 6 to day 8, we don't currently have anything issued. Taking a look at our excessive rainfall forecast, for today we do have a slight risk for the Central Plains, where we could see the potential of some scattered flash flooding. We also do have a marginal risk for portions of coastal South Carolina and coastal Georgia, where we could see the potential for some isolated flash flooding. We also do have a marginal risk for the Central Plains that extends up into the Midwest for northern Oklahoma, Kansas, Nebraska, Iowa, southern Minnesota, and parts of Wisconsin, where we could see some isolated flash flooding as well. For tomorrow, we do have a marginal risk for central Nebraska there into northeastern Colorado and southeastern South Dakota. And then for our day 3 outlook, we do have a pretty large slight risk that extends from southern Minnesota into portions of Wisconsin, mainly the western half of Wisconsin, where we could see some scattered flash flooding. Taking a look at our weather model, starting off with our 500 millibars and our surface observations and how those are going to work in conjunction to support the risk for severe thunderstorms for today. Starting off with our upper air pattern and how that's going to support the risk for severe thunderstorms. As of right now, we do have a not an enclosed trough that is currently pushing into this region. It is mainly just the subtropical jet that's kind of pushing into this region. We do have a little bit of a trough, but it isn't enclosed and it's kind of weak. But as far as our 500 millibar flow goes, we definitely have some pretty decently strong flow across this region. Not really too many complaints here when it comes to the 500 millibar flow and the strength of it. Could definitely be higher for the significant risk for severe thunderstorms, but still sufficient nonetheless, with 500 millibar flow upwards of 30 to 40, maybe even 50 miles per hour in some regions. Definitely a little bit more on the moderate to weak side of things, but we are expected to see a very strong flow that is going to be backing our storms just immediately west of our storms, with 80 mile per hour flow at 500 millibars that is going to be backing our storms. We are going to see a extremely strong rear inflow jet that extends up into the upper levels of the atmosphere as well to fuel this possible derecho that could develop across the Central Plains, and that will definitely mix down to the surface and support very strong damaging wind gusts across this region. And then as far as our surface observation goes, it's kind of all over the place. We do have a surface low that is across the Texas Panhandle, just to the south of where storms are expected to develop. We do have a little bit of a combination of a cold front and a stationary front that is kind of just set across this region. That's going to trigger our severe thunderstorms. And the setup of this initiating boundary compared to our upper air pattern definitely supports a little bit more of a linear mode. However, because storms are not really going to form along the initiating boundary, they're just going to form a little area that's going to be driven along by our 500 millibar jet here. They are going to progress along the initiating boundary after they initially fire. They aren't really going to be attached to the initiating boundary is what I'm kind of trying to say here. They're going to be a little bit separate after they do fire. Taking a look at our 850 millibars in our low level jet and how that's going to affect our risk for tornadoes across this region with our directional shear. We are expected to see a decently strong low-level jet across this region. Definitely not too terribly strong. It's definitely pretty modest. As of right now, it is a little bit more on the weaker side of things, with 850 millibar flow upwards of 30 to even 40 miles per hour, which is definitely more on the modest to weaker side of things. That could potentially strengthen ahead of our storms, especially further down to the south, where it could potentially reach upwards of 50 miles per hour in some regions, but mainly the mid to upper 40 miles per hour. Definitely a little bit more of a modest low-level jet, but will definitely support some pretty sufficient directional shear to support the potential for tornadoes that could be embedded in this possible derecho. Taking a look at our 200 millibar winds and how that's going to affect our risk for damaging wind gusts, our risk for severe thunderstorms overall, and the potential for hail with our speed shear. Starting off with the spreading of our wind vectors and how that's going to affect our overall risk for severe thunderstorms, you can tell that we definitely have some pretty noticeable spreading of our wind vectors and some noticeable defluence aloft that will definitely support a lot of lift across this region and be an overall very large aid in our overall risk for severe thunderstorms, with very noticeable defluence supporting very large amounts of lift across this region. We will also definitely have some pretty strong 200 millibar flow across this region, upwards of 70 knots across this region. Definitely a little bit more on the modest side of things, definitely not too terribly strong. However, this should definitely mix down to the surface and aid in our overall risk for damaging wind gusts across this region. Keep in mind, I am still on the cusp of forecasting damaging wind gusts. I feel pretty confident with forecasting large hail and the potential for tornadoes. Tornadoes being the predominant thing that I like to forecast. I'm not too good at forecasting damaging wind gusts. If anyone knows any good sources where I can learn how to forecast damaging wind gusts with the models that are provided to me, definitely leave a link to a source in the comments so I can go over them. It'll definitely be much appreciated. So some things in this forecast definitely take with a grain of salt, because I am still learning, especially in the field of damaging wind gusts. Taking a look at our bulk shear and how that's going to affect our risk for hail across this region, we are expected to see some pretty large bulk shear values across this region. Bulk shear values that are going to be backing our line of storms, potentially reaching upwards of 40 knots to potentially even 90 knots in some regions across this region. Will definitely be very strong, definitely very supportive of the potential for widespread large hail across this region. And with the fact that this is going to be a little bit more of a linear mode, storms are going to be definitely very widespread across this region. It definitely comes down to more of a thing with coverage than really the potential or really the intensity of hail across this region. With this line of storms and the setup that we have, we will definitely see very widespread and definitely very large hail, as bulk shear will definitely be sufficient for that. However, I definitely think hail shouldn't be extreme, but could definitely get to some pretty large sizes, definitely upwards of 2 inches, potentially even approaching 3 inches, which is still extremely large. Don't get me wrong, but I definitely don't really think it may get up to 4 inches, but it may be possible. Taking a look at our storm relative felicity and how that's going to indicate our risk for tornadoes across this region, we are expected to see some modest storm relative felicity values across this region, ranging anywhere from the mid 100s to even the 200s in some regions. Definitely think that maybe some 300s may be possible in some isolated locations. Definitely very supportive of the potential for embedded tornadoes across this region. We will definitely see the potential for some spin up along this possible derecho, and embedded tornadoes are definitely possible with some pretty sufficient directional shear, but I definitely don't think that we'll see anything too crazy as far as a tornado risk. Taking a look at our composite reflectivity so we can go over some general radar analysis and potentially attempt on our timing. Let's start off with our general radar analysis. I'm not really too sure how well composite reflectivity really handles possible derecho events, because there was one time in my career that I forecasted a derecho and knew that it was going to be a derecho. In fact, I didn't really forecast it, to be honest. I was on vacation when it happened, so I don't really know how well composite reflectivity really handles possible derecho events, so definitely take what I'm about to say with a grain of salt. However, this is definitely a really sufficient look for the potential of a possible derecho and very significant damaging wind gusts, as we have a really tight, very strong Boeing line segment here, which is definitely very sufficient and more favorable to the potential of significant damaging wind gusts than really the potential of tornadoes. This will also support some embedded in very widespread massive hailstones across this region, and definitely the possible embedded tornado is definitely possible. However, we shouldn't really see anything too extreme as far as the potential for tornadoes. Again, the damaging wind risk is definitely going to be the primary risk for today, and that's definitely apparent with a look from what we are seeing on composite reflectivity, with this very apparent Boeing line segment being overall significantly more favorable to the potential of damaging wind gusts than more so the potential of tornadoes. And as far as our timing goes, I'll try to attempt it. We are expected to see our storms develop in southeastern Colorado sometime around potentially 1 to 2 p.m. across this region, I think. I'm pretty sure this is 2 hours behind me. And then that's going to move into the Central Plains time zone into Garden City and Dodge City, potentially around 5 to 6 p.m. across this region, moving into more central Kansas, impacting regions such as Leonard and Pratt around 7 p.m. to 8 p.m., moving into the I-35 region, including Salina, McPherson, Newton, and Wichita regions around 10 to 9 p.m. across this region. Anywhere from 8 to 10 p.m. This storm should be approaching the I-35 corridor, moving into the Topeka region, likely around midnight to 11 p.m. as the storm exits the moderate risk region and begins to die off. Moving into the Kansas City region, definitely fizzling out quite a lot around the very early morning hours of tomorrow to midnight, and then moving into Missouri as some rainfall with potentially some damaging wind gusts embedded in that around the very early morning hours of tomorrow, with some lingering severe thunderstorms in more of the upper risks, such as the enhanced risk and the slight risk, where we could see the potential of maybe some damaging wind gusts and the potential for some hail, depending on our low-level jet. Maybe the possibility of tornadoes, but definitely could see the potential of some hail and maybe some damaging wind gusts as well that may linger on into the very early morning hours of tomorrow, just to the south of the Wichita region into northern Oklahoma. Taking a look at our dew points and how that's going to affect our instability, we are expected to see quite a lot of moisture across this region, definitely a little bit more on the modest side of things, with low-level dew point values that are going to be getting upwards of the upper 50s and the low to mid 60s across this region. Is definitely a little bit more so on the modest side of things to weaker side of things, but will definitely support some pretty modest instability that will be sufficient in fueling our severe thunderstorms across this region. Even with some lower dew point values, we could still see the possibility for some pretty significant severe thunderstorms across this region. And this surface high pressure system that I'm seeing on our surface pressure is definitely a very concerning sign to me, as it is indicating a high pressure system just behind our main Boeing segment here, our possible derecho in the rear inflow jet, indicating that we could see a extremely strong rear inflow jet and some very, very strong damaging wind gusts as a result, as that high pressure system will be the result of a lot of air that's being moved into this region to fuel that rear inflow jet and continue pushing this Boeing segment forward, and that leads to a little bit more of a higher pressure system that's going to push this thing forward and lead to some really strong damaging wind gusts across this region. Taking a look at our temperature and how that's going to affect our instability across this region, we are expected to see quite a lot of heat across this region. In the moderate risk region, we are expected to see temperatures that are expected to get upwards of the low 90s across this region, on top of some modest dew point values that will definitely support a very large amount of instability across this region and be very sufficient in fueling some really strong updrafts across this region, despite us having more modest dew point values. We definitely may not see anything too extremely crazy as far as our instability. I definitely don't think that we'll see cave values that are going to be getting upwards of 4,000 and 5,000, but I do think that the 2,000s are definitely expected and could potentially even reach the 3,000s, but we will look at our cave values later on in this forecast. Taking a look at our lapse rates and how that's going to affect our instability and the overall potential for severe thunderstorms and the possibility for significant damaging wind gusts across this region, as well as our potential for hail, we are expected to see very, very strong lapse rates across this region. This is mid-level as well, so we may even have extremely strong, extremely steep low-level lapse rates as well. Very steep lapse rates will definitely allow for more mixing from the upper levels of the atmosphere and support more damaging wind gusts. A lot of those upper level winds will mix down to the surface as a result of these strong lapse rates and support a very big risk for damaging wind gusts across this region. We will look at some other parameters that also support damaging wind gusts as well, such as D-Cape, which is a form of cape, but it's more so for the sinking of air than it is for the rising of air, and it is a very handy tool in forecasting damaging wind gusts. And the higher the D-Cape, the stronger the damaging wind gusts and the stronger the possibility for a powerful downburst. But regardless, we are expected to see a very, very strong lapse rates, which will support a lot of mixing in the mixing down from our upper levels. And as far as our hail risk goes, this will definitely support a broadened sector for hail development in the upper levels of the atmosphere, which will allow for rain particles and hail particles to be suspended by a strong updraft for longer, and allow for those hail sizes to get much bigger before they finally fall down to the surface. Plus, this will also support very large amounts of instability as well. Taking a look at our cloud cover and how that's going to affect our instability and our lapse rates. As of right now, we do have a little bit of cloud cover across this region, However, it is more so indicating instability than it is really affecting our instability in ways that would be more limiting. We definitely have some pretty decent cloud cover, but it is a cumulus field, which is indicating that indicating the presence of very large amounts of instability across this region, and is definitely not a good sign as far as the intensity of storms. And that's not me speaking in my storm chaser brain, where it's like, oh, the storms are going to be worse because of this cumulus field. It's indicating more instability across this region. It's indicating a lot of destabilization and very large amounts of instability across this region, so definitely not a good sign as far as the intensity of our storms across this region, as this weaker cloud cover will not really lead to much overmixing. Overmixing should definitely not be a problem, because we definitely have a little bit of cloud cover across this region. We don't have perfectly clear skies, but with the sun that is able to reach the surface and surface heating across this region, that will support some really strong lapse rates across this region. And with what we talked about on lapse rates previously, that will definitely support more mixing from the upper levels of the atmosphere down to the surface and stronger damaging wind gusts. Taking a look at our convective inhibition and how that's going to affect our overall risk for severe thunderstorms, as well as our instability. As of right now, we do have some pretty strong warm air advection out of the south, very warm air advection in our mid levels, and we have a very, very thick cap as a result of that strong warm air advection. This cap is expected to fully erode at around what seems to be the early evening hours, the early afternoon hours, around 2 p.m. to 1 p.m. across this region, and that's when storms are going to be available to develop. However, storms do look like they are going to be a little bit more delayed from when the cap develops. Definitely going to have an hour or two until storms actually develop by the time that cap breaks. However, with the cap that is going to be set in place for a good couple of hours and how strong it is, that will definitely allow for a lot of instability to build underneath that cap. And with very, very strong warm air advection and a lot of lapse rates, we will definitely have a pretty thick elevated mixed layer across this region, which will support overall much more explosive storms across this region by the time that cap finally breaks and our elevated mixed layer breaks as well. Taking a look at our most unstable cape and how that's going to fuel our severe thunderstorms across this region, we are expected to see a lot of instability across this region. Definitely not extreme, but definitely really strong. We definitely have some pretty strong cape values that are getting upwards of the upper 2000s and even the low 3000s across this region, potentially approaching the mid 3000s in some regions. But regardless, this is more than sufficient in fueling our severe thunderstorms, and will definitely be able to fuel our significant severe thunderstorms, including the potential for some very strong damaging wind gusts. I wanted to say violent, but violent damaging wind gusts are definitely on the table for today, with wind gusts that could potentially reach upwards of 100 miles per hour in a very widespread region. Again, this will be more than sufficient in fueling the potential for severe thunderstorms, the risk for strong damaging wind gusts, and even violent damaging wind gusts, the possibility for some massive hailstones, very widespread hail as well, and the possibility for a couple embedded tornadoes. Taking a look at our surface-based cape and how that's going to fuel our potential for surface-based storms across this region, not really too many complaints here. The majority of our most unstable cape is expected to translate down to our surface, which is going to allow for surface-based storms and the potential for tornadoes to develop across this region. Taking a look at our 0 to 3 kilometer instability and how that's going to aid in fueling our severe thunderstorms across this region, we aren't really expected to see a whole lot of 0 to 3 kilometer instability across this region, so not really too much aid's going to come out of our 0 to 3 kilometer instability. Regardless, we do have a lot of surface-based instability and a lot of most unstable cape, which will still be sufficient, very sufficient in fueling our severe thunderstorms, regardless of the lack of 0 to 3 kilometer instability to really aid in our strong updrafts. Taking a look at our meso-analysis page, we aren't at the the part of the video where we look at our hail parameters just yet, but we do have a couple parameters that I do want to look at, mainly two. Starting off with our D cape, which is, in other words, our downdraft cape. It determines how strong our downdrafts are going to be, and in turn, the risk for damaging wind gusts. And you can already tell that we have some extreme amounts of D cape set up across the high plains, with D cape values back into southeastern Colorado that are reaching upwards of 1,200 and 1,300, even upwards of 1,600 in the Texas Panhandle. These are definitely very, very strong DK values and will support very, very strong downdrafts across this region. Another parameter that I do want to look at is our derecho composite. Again, I have been throwing around the D word a couple times in this forecast, which I definitely think is a very big possibility that is currently set on the table for today. I definitely think a derecho is definitely possible, especially with how our deterministic wind gust models that we will look at later have looked like, but we definitely have some pretty decently large derecho composite parameter values across this region, upwards of 6 across the high plains in the Oklahoma Panhandle, the Texas Panhandle, in southwestern Kansas. Definitely some really high derecho composite parameter values, which are very indicative of the possibility of a derecho developing across this region. Taking a look at our wind gust models and how that's going to indicate the risk for damaging wind gusts. Again, these are deterministic models, so they kind of just throw out what the risk for damaging wind gusts, or not what the risk for damaging wind gusts is going to be, but how strong our damaging wind gusts could possibly be. I'm not really too certain about the legitimacy of this model, even though I use it in basically every forecast and I put a lot of faith into it. I'm still kind of uncertain about the legitimacy of this model. However, this is a extremely nasty look regardless. Very, very widespread, violent damaging wind gusts that go off the chart for Radar Omega. The only other time that we've seen this happen was with hurricanes back in the 2023 hurricane season, when we had extremely strong damaging wind gusts greater than 70 miles per hour that go off the chart on the Radar Omega models. So we could very well see damaging wind gusts that could range anywhere from 70 miles per hour to potentially upwards of 100 miles per hour in some regions. I think 70 miles per hour could definitely be more widespread, and that is still definitely could do some pretty substantial damage to property across this region. So if you do live in this region, I highly suggest tying down any loose unsecured objects or bringing in anything that may blow away or anything that could break from flying debris. I highly suggest bringing in anything that you may not want to have break or you don't want to lose outside. I highly suggest either bringing those things inside or tying them down, as damaging wind gusts will get very, very strong today. Taking a look at our energy helicity index values and how that's going to indicate the potential for tornadoes across this region, we have some shockingly high energy helicity index values that I honestly was not expecting. We definitely do have some pretty strong energy helicity index values, getting upwards of 2 to even 3, and maybe even 4 to 5 in some regions ahead of our possible derecho, which is definitely very indicative of the potential for embedded tornadoes across this region, across this Boeing line segment. I think that may be a result of more so the instability amongst a weaker low-level jet. Definitely have some more modest storm relative helicity values across this region, but we definitely have some pretty decently strong, anywhere from modestly strong to strong most unstable cape values across this region. I definitely do think that could support multiple tornadoes across this region. Definitely think a few tornadoes may be possible. I do know that the word few has been thrown around by a couple meteorologists, including the SBC. I definitely think that may be possible. I definitely think we could see a couple to a few embedded tornadoes along this derecho, or possible derecho. And with some pretty strong energy helicity next values to go along with it. I wouldn't be surprised if we did get multiple tornado warnings to spin up along the Boeing line segment later today. And I definitely think maybe a significant tornado may be possible. I definitely think a significant tornado may not be entirely ruled out, because we definitely have some pretty decently strong, most unstable Cape values across this region. Could support some strong updrafts and potentially a strong tornado across this region amongst some more modest storm relative felicity values. Taking a look at our large hail parameter, we are still hours out from our storms actually developing, so these large hail parameter values will likely change by the time our storms actually develop. But as of right now, we do have upwards of 32 to 28 and 24 across the Kansas and northern Oklahoma region. Definitely some really high large hail parameter values that are indicating the potential for large hail across this region. Definitely have a very big overlap for the potential of some large to even significant hail across this region. If we look at our significant hail parameter, we do have a pretty broad 3 across this region, indicating at least the potential for some significant hail. For our SARS significant hail percentage, we do have upwards of a 70% across some of these regions, with a broader 60%. These will likely be higher by the time our storms actually develop, but because we are hours out from our storms actually developing, we definitely have some lower model values as far as hail goes as of right now. And then for our SARS hail size, which is an interesting one, we do have some pretty decently large sizes for our SARS hail size, indicating upwards of 2 in anywhere that you see the deep blue, and potentially even approaching 3 in some regions. 3 inches, I definitely think may be possible. 4-inch maybe. But I definitely think that with some more modest 200 millibar flow and some weaker 500 millibar flow and overall weaker bulk shear values and weaker speed shear, I definitely think that we may have overall less of a potential for large hail, but we will definitely see widespread large hail. But we may not see hail sizes upwards of 4 inches, but definitely think that greater than 2.5 inches may be possible. Now that I've told you the weather, please go down to the description and check out the socials for Project Gladiator and join the Discord for any updates on Project Gladiator. If you live in any of the areas I covered for today, please stay weather alert for the time being. If you notice anything might have been wrong in this forecast or would like to make a suggestion or ask a question, please leave a comment. I do have something to say about the GoFundMe. We don't have a bank account that is currently attached to the GoFundMe. I do plan on getting that set up though here soon, so by the time I do get that set up, I will include the GoFundMe segment in more videos, and I will make that video that details what Project Gladiator is all about to entice people to go to the GoFundMe a little bit more. But until then, just watch out for any words about the GoFundMe and the bank account that we'll have set up, because right now I'm pretty sure that you are unable to donate with the fact that I don't have a bank account set up, and I'll definitely get that set up here soon. So definitely make sure you're watching out for any words about the GoFundMe.